Jonathan, you're muted.
All right, we had some technical difficulties there to start. I had myself on mute, but good morning and welcome. My name is Jonathan Butler and I'm the president and CEO here at 1Berkshire. Welcome to another virtual town hall. This is the 5th installation in our series, and today we're going to be focusing on higher education. And we have the leadership of higher education here in the Berkshires, where we're going to discuss the outlook for public and private higher education, both here and beyond, as we move through this crisis. This live webinar is being recorded, so I want to note that for everybody. And the recording of this webinar will be made available later today through our website. It will also be played through some public access television throughout the Berkshires in the coming weeks. The format for today's town hall is we're going to spend around 45 minutes on a panel discussion with some prompts and get into some topics that we think you're interested in hearing about, and then we'll transition to some Q&A for those that are already on. The best way to submit questions, and we encourage you to start doing so as soon as you have questions, and we'll start sorting through them, is on the bottom part of your screen. You will see a Q&A, you'll see a Q&A icon. You can submit questions there. You can also submit them through the chat function, and we'll sort through. So our panel, we have a fantastic panel this morning, which I'm thrilled to be able to sit and listen to this group and hear what's going on in your colleges. And I'm going to start right off with an introduction and we'll get started. So introducing this morning's panel, we have literally the leadership of our local higher ed institutions. So we have with us President Jamie Birge from Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. We have President Ellen Kennedy from Berkshire Community College. We have President Maud Mandel from Williams College. And we have Dr. John Weinstein, the incoming provost at Bard College at Simon's Rock. And thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us. I can only imagine what your calendars look like right now and how many things you're juggling, but we really appreciate you taking the time, and I think our listeners will really appreciate this opportunity this morning. So we'll move right into introductions, and what I'd love to do is ask each of you if you could just take 2 or 3 minutes and say good morning to our listeners, and maybe just share a little bit of a current status update at your institution. And we'll start off with Dr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Jonathan. It is really an honor to be here with this august group. I was thinking as we were preparing for this, how fortunate the Berkshires actually are when you think about higher education. We have the #1 rated, most prestigious private liberal arts country, perhaps in the world, right here in the Berkshires. We have the #1, perhaps most prestigious public liberal arts college in our own MCLA. And here we are with the most progressive and forward-thinking early college, the first early college in the country with Bard Simon's Rock. So I feel really fortunate to be with these 3 fine leaders and to be a part of that and to complement some of their efforts and to be part of addressing both the family opportunities in Berkshire County and the workforce needs of Berkshire County. At Berkshire, this year, we finished, as did almost everyone else in the country, in a remote education format. Next Friday would have been our commencement at Tanglewood, a very special day, and we'll be launching a virtual commencement. We looked at moving commencement to the fall and came to realize it may be very difficult even then, so we opted to make sure that these students would be celebrated. And so we're celebrating them twice. We will do a virtual commencement that will be launched off with partnerships through PCTV and so many others next Friday at 4:30. And then next year on June 4th, we hope we'll be back at Tanglewood and be celebrating the class of 20 and 21. So we're excited about that. This summer, we have moved to mostly remote education. Interestingly, we started out a little bit slow and we're actually exceeding last year's numbers. We've seen an uptick in enrollment for courses this summer that are being offered online. In the next few weeks, we're making formal announcements about what fall will look like. Our faculty have been very hard at work thinking about how to ensure a strong quality program and meeting the needs of our students. And we are looking at the data from this semester to see how things went. It wasn't really a true reflection because it was everyone pivoting at the same moment and everyone in a different place of how they use technology as they do education. Now we have the time to plan and we're using that. Our faculty are totally going to be immersed this summer in preparing for whatever modality they'll be using this fall. I will stop there and say that is how we have finished the semester, how we're looking at this summer, and how we're preparing for the fall. The one thing I would say is a lot of students, unlike the four-year institutions where people usually make their decisions by early May of where they plan to attend, people who attending community colleges make those decisions right up until the first week of classes. So we're still in full mode of enrolling people and working with them and helping to customize a plan for them to move their education forward. So thank you for this opportunity, and thrilled to see so many people participating today and looking forward to their questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Ellen. We'll transition to President Mandel.
Thanks so much. And I'll just reiterate Ellen's comments about how great it is to be here with all of you. One of the opportunities we were just talking about before this launched of this moment is it's brought us together in these virtual ways a couple of times, and really pleased to be able to do it. So thank you. And you'll my guess is you're going to hear, for those listening, a certain kind of set of questions that we're all navigating. We're very different kinds of institutions, but in some ways we're all facing the same questions. And so I think, and we're probably all facing a kind of what I keep describing as an iterative moving timeline, whereas we try to make the best decisions possible based on ever evolving and incomplete information. And so we're making decisions in real time, but also trying to put off decisions as long as possible so that we can make the very best decision possible given information that's available. So at Williams, we too are wrapping up a semester. We also, we surveyed our graduating seniors about what kind of completion experience they'd like, and they overwhelmingly said that they wanted to do it in person when we could. So we're likely going to schedule a commencement celebration for them next summer, although we're waiting to pick a date until we have a better sense of how next summer is going to look here and in the world. But we are doing also an online, not a commencement, but a celebration of the completion of the experience on the date that we were intending to hold commencement in early June. We don't have summer classes on campus. We are not holding our traditional research programs and other pre-orientation programs and things that we would have done on campus. So right now we're in very heavy scenario planning for the fall. And we're really pursuing both options. On the one hand, we're doing all the work necessary to think about what it would be to open safely and to think about the myriad questions involved in a residential college on the one hand, and then simultaneously we're thinking about how to build a remote educational program that we could be proud of if we feel that we can't open safely. And I think one of the things that's quite different from March is that we have time to plan for the fall. So, and I just echo something Ellen said about the difference between responding in an emergency and versus planning, even if it's not a lot of time to plan in higher education terms for a successful remote experience in the fall. So faculty, staff, and staff committees are hard at work on this. We have student participation. We're doing a lot of surveying of students to have a sense of how they're thinking about next year and what their remote learning experiences were like. Obviously really like to open if I can, but safety is the primary thing that I think about. So trying to figure out if we can do that and answer those questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, President Mandel. And we'll turn to Dr. Birge, and then we'll finish with Dr. Weinstein.
Well, good morning, everyone. Jonathan, thanks for hosting this. Being a college president is lonely most often because there's nobody else like us on a college campus. There are other VPs and other deans, and so there's really not another president. So when we can get together and I can see my colleagues, it's an awfully nice thing. So good morning to my friends, and thanks for joining this. What an extraordinary 3 months we've had, right, around the world, and certainly the impacts that it's made on college campuses. We early on, we pivoted very quickly, and I think very well, to completing a term. By the end of March, we were teaching all of our courses, more than 500 courses. We're transitioned from a classroom-based course to a remote learning environment by more than 100 faculty, which I'm tremendously proud of the faculty and the staff who supported that transition. It was no easy task by any means, but I think all of us have been perhaps a little bit surprised, frankly, at how well it's gone, and that remote learning is in fact something that we can do. People in higher education are really quite creative and innovative, and they've found a way, right? So I'm really proud of my colleagues for the work that they've done, and I know that's the case among my colleagues here, that they share a similar feeling of their colleagues on their campuses. Shortly after we managed kind of that chaos of trying to transition, we started thinking about what the summer would look like and then what the fall would look like. We have a return to campus advisory committee that has 4 different subcommittees looking at academic administration, student affairs, campus operations, and then staff return. Think about what we would have to do to provide as safe an environment as possible for people to return in the fall. We made an early decision that we would have our summer courses online, and similar to what President Kennedy had said, we've seen larger numbers of enrollment for summer than we have in previous years. And so we've had to think about what do we do in the fall. For us, we are thinking about what does the science tell us, certainly. And it's told us a mixture of stories over the last few months. We've seen shifting guidance and advice from different populations, public health officials, government officials, scientists. And so sometimes it feels like we're trying to put our foot down on second base and someone keeps moving the bag. It's been a little bit difficult, but we know that both the science of the virus, as well as the science of behavior, is what will guide us. We know there's some survey data out about students' perspectives about what they'd like to have and see in the fall. And so we're using the science and the behavioral data to make some decisions about returning. I will say we haven't made a decision yet, but our plan A is to look at returning in the fall if we can do so as safely as possible. So that's really the path that we're heading down. We also know that we may have to continue in a remote learning environment and a remote work environment. And so we're looking at that as well. But I think by early June, we'll probably have made a decision, at least a tentative decision based on what might happen over the summer about what will happen this fall. So I'll leave it there and answer questions later on.
Thank you, Dr. Birge. Dr. Weinstein?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks so much to Ellen for the shout out about Simon's Rock. We do indeed have a founding and leading place in the early college movement, and excited to be part of this group. We serve 450 students on our beautiful, though currently very quiet campus in Great Barrington, and 400 of them in our early college, and then 50 students in Bard Academy, which is our independent high school for 9th and 10th graders. So we've got a wide range of ages going on, from as young as 13 to as old as 20, which is also interesting in this situation. We have completed classes for the academic year. We did a celebration of our graduating students. It was not a commencement. It was a virtual version of the awards portion of the commencement ceremony. So all the students who would have received awards have been honored in that way. In terms of the in-person walking across the stage, we're thinking of that for May 2021. Seeing where things go in that regard. We do plan to start the fall semester at our scheduled time, which for us is August 22nd. That will most likely be a combination of in-person and online elements. We're hoping that the predominant amount will be in person, but we're planning for all of those aspects. We've not traditionally had summer offerings at Simon's Rock, so that's not something that we had to consider, but actually it's something that we are doing this year in a new way, because recently Bard College President Leanne Bathstein announced the formation of OSUN, the Open Society University Network, which is a worldwide consortium of like-minded institutions. So we actually had been planning to offer our students online opportunities with students and other campuses around the world, and so we were still able to do that. So that is a new piece that we are able to have going on this summer. In terms of our planning toward the fall, we have several committees that are working on how to meet state guidelines for a safe reopening. So looking at everything from protocols for hygiene and sanitization to socially distanced education, monitoring containment, and all of those elements. For us, we see our institutional size as a strength because we are pretty small. And we have a very kind of family-like feel. We see this campus as our home. So we'll be definitely doing a lot of one-on-one connections with students and families over the course of the summer and figuring out how to make the small size a strength in managing this situation.
Great, thank you for that update, Dr. Weinstein, and thank you to each of you for kind of that overview of things happening. The layers of complication involved in an entire institution having to pivot to the extent that you have, I can only imagine how much thought and your leadership has gone into where you are now. I'd like to shift gears a little bit of kind of our first topic. Obviously, reopening the economy is the topic that everybody is talking about the last few weeks. It affects every single employer. And obviously, all of your institutions, not only from the perspective of being educational centers, but also as major economic drivers for the Berkshires, your major employers. I'd love to hear some of your reactions to the governor's plan that came out on Monday. Obviously, it's a phase plan. There was a lot of detail about phase 1. There's a lot of gray in phase 2, 3, and beyond. But I know that there's certainly some direction in there that is pertinent to higher education, and I'd love to hear some of your immediate reactions. If someone wants to jump in, go ahead.
I'll jump in. We're actually scrambling today to complete the checklist for phase 1 to do a pilot program to help one of our particular discrete programs around nursing complete their semester because they were not able to complete all the work, and it's a bridge program, so it goes until June. So we've been testing all kinds of protocols. We have been closely adhering to the guidance of CDC, of the Mass Department of Public Health, of all of the advisories that are coming out from our own Berkshire County and the city of Pittsfield, from the governor, watching the governor's daily updates to our community. So there are some very stringent guidelines. The governor has a 4-phase approach. We have an allied health program, and we're trying to tuck ourselves into that to say that these very small, discrete, licensed and accredited programs that they're not forgiving on the accreditation. They're expecting us to deliver on the accredited aspects of those programs. So we have until 4 o'clock this afternoon to get a submission in that shows that we are meeting phase 1 checklist, which is pretty detailed. And I will be signing my name, attesting to it, if I feel comfortable that we are in fact in a place to do that. So just like so many businesses in Berkshire County who are scrambling to make sure that they can sign their name and attest to the fact that their institution, their business, their focus is addressed, we're doing the same thing right now at Berkshire Community College.
I would just add, a cautious 4-phase approach feels like a very good one. So I'm very pleased to have these guidelines come out. Speaking for us, but I suspect for all of us, I think we're anxious to see the higher education. And I know there is a group working on that, and that's going to follow. Other states have put out similar kinds of guidelines for higher education, and those in addition to the ones that we're seeing for broadly opening in these phases, I think are going to have a huge impact on the ways in which we shape our processes of opening when and if we are able to do that.
Yeah, I'll add to what Ellen and Maud have said, that I think it was helpful to see the phased nature of the reopening. I think by and large, higher education, there wasn't a lot of guidance or information about higher education in the governor's initial press release about it. And frankly, I think that's okay, because my sense is, speaking from my own sector, we've been ahead of the curve on a lot of this. We've been talking about what would be necessary for us to safely reopen in the fall. And so I think we're fairly far down the path on this. It's not surprising to hear that BCC is submitting their plan today. They've always had 1 foot raised, right? So they know what comes, they know how to anticipate really well. I think that the guidance that we're getting, and I think it's important to offer that, because colleges and universities are very different. Just look at the 4 of us. We all have very different institutions, and it would be difficult to have a cookie cutter plan for all higher ed institutions in the Commonwealth. So I like the fact that it's framed more as guidance for us, because we all have our own nuance as to how best to roll that out. But I think it was helpful, and we'll be interested in hearing what else, what other thoughts. As Maud mentioned, there's a subcommittee of higher ed institutions presidents who are meeting to talk about what to do, and it'll be helpful to hear a little bit more of their input as well.
I agree. To echo Jamie's point that, higher education being able to figure out what it specifically means kind of for itself as an industry and also for each individual institution is really helpful, because again, even this group is very diverse just within our county here. For us, we don't have anything that would be a phase 1 type program. For us, phase 2 might mean summer training for faculty. We have traditionally been a summer training site for early college educators. That might give us an opportunity to try out dorm living and dining hall usage with adults being the students. Can kind of give us a chance to test out some of those protocols and things like that. So I appreciate that the state plan enables you to do things like that rather than have to wait to open everything all at the exact same moment.
I'd just jump in and add too, because I don't want there to be any fear or concern. We have announced that we're on a remote work plan through at least July 3rd for all of our employees. So although there are some people who need to physically be on the campus to do their work or things need to happen, it's a very tiny, small footprint, and the rest of our employees are doing all of their work, just as we're doing today, in a remote fashion.
That's also true at Williams, where sort of, if possible, working remotely remains the policy of the institution for now.
I think those are really good points. That one of the helpful elements of the phased plan really didn't affect us as much, and that is that it gave guidance about how the rest of the Commonwealth is reopening. Like BCC, in fact, I just announced yesterday that we're extending our remote work environment through the end of June, primarily because our concern is that many of our employees are parents of children who aren't in school and who childcare and daycare centers are not yet open. We think that they may open at the end of the month, June. And so we didn't want to add that additional tension or stress to their lives. So we extended that remote work, and of course it could be extended further. My hope is that by then we'll have a more definitive plan about how we're going to start phasing people to come back. But I think the phases that the governor offered were helpful for us indirectly, is that it guided how we were deciding what we would do with our colleagues on our campuses.
So I think that's actually a good transition point to our next topic. The idea of what this experience has in many ways forced upon all of us, but there's also, if you look at the positive side and the benefits that might come out of this, it's an intriguing conversation. In these other town halls, whether it was some of our cultural institutions or our manufacturing leaders, they've talked about, how they've had their hand forced with innovation in some areas. I'd love to understand, some of these changes in our behaviors have been uncomfortable, and we certainly are going to look forward to moving past them. But others, I think we've learned a lot from. Can you talk a little bit about, what's going to be different in higher education when we come out of this? What innovation might we have kind of been forced into that might end up being something that's a positive practice moving forward?
I can jump in here. I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I speak more from my discipline now as a historian than I do perhaps as someone who can read the future. so I'm always cautious about saying, what is going to be different, since obviously there's so much we don't know about the future still. And I think so many of us are just moving out of reactive mode into planning mode again. So I want to be cautious. But there are things obviously that have emerged. Those of us that are in the sector of residential college learning, I think, to pick up on something that President Birge said a few minutes ago, have begun to think about the ways in which the modalities of teaching that remote learning offers can infuse and enrich some aspects of teaching without suggesting that we would move in any way to a fully remote platform. But those are, or even a largely remote platform, but there are aspects of the modality of remote learning, I think, that faculty have found to be enriching of their teaching. And that's one area that I think could have significant impact in a positive way. I also think other things that we were chatting about at the beginning, just even the degree and the amount to which we all travel, and the impact on our environment and the ways in which we're thinking about sustainability commitments, and how to use some of the lessons learned for what is possible to do remotely, certainly for me has been fascinating and important, and I think will have an impact on how we think about this going forward at Williams. And one can think of many things like that, where there are aspects, and again, without predicting an outcome for the audience, it's not so much saying that this will definitely change, but rather that we're learning things, and we are learning institutions. And so I think we always look at events like small and large that happen on our campuses to say, what can we take from this that we can grow and innovate from, and get better? And I do think there's going to be any number of things that's the case in this instance.
You know, I think there are two areas in particular that have become incredibly clear for many of us at MCLA. One is that while we knew that a number of our students, about 33% of our students, don't have secure access to food. And we do have students who don't have a safe place to go. And so I think that's the case on all of our campuses. But for MCLA, I think it became much more real for other people on campus to know that we are serving a population of students that have financial need that's greater than just access to college. It's access to food and secure housing. One of the very first things we did, we actually were contacted by a donor, an anonymous donor who had sold an IT firm to make a contribution because he was concerned about students not having access to hardware, computer hardware for remote learning. And so we launched an MCLA resiliency fund very quickly. It was probably one of the first things that we did, and had tremendous response from alumni, friends, donors, people that we'd never had a donor relationship with before, who gave money to this fund so that we could provide resources to students for things like rent for housing, or access to food, or paying utility bills, or for gas for their car, for jobs that they still had, or internships they were completing. And I think in many ways, that sharing of resources with our students made their lives more real and palpable for more people at MCLA. The second area that I think really is driving, or will be driving, some change. I mean, you know, the fact that the COVID-19 virus has been so devastating and caused so much pain and suffering and death, we can't overlook that has happened. It's also the case that it presents an opportunity for research to look at not just the effects of the scientific effects of a virus, but the effects of a virus on behavior and culture. And I think we're going to see, you know, colleges and universities do what they do best, which is to examine and analyze all of these things. And one of the things that I think is going to come out, it's been the case here, is that remote learning or online learning isn't all it's cracked up to be, right? The traditional age student likes that interactive experience with faculty, that academic intimacy that they have in the classroom. Our students really miss that. Now, there's been a function and a utility to remote learning that we've all had to embrace for this semester and perhaps going forward. But I think one of the things that I'm hearing is that students like that environment where they can exchange ideas face to face with people. And I think we'll discover that the pedestal that online learning has had for a very long time may not be as stable as some people think.
I think, you know, for us, our primary concern has always been the education, health, and safety of our students. This requires you to think about some of those things in different ways and look at aspects you might have overlooked. I think from an educational standpoint, we have found that even in, you know, small intimate classes, there are some students who have more difficulty having their voice heard in the in-person classroom, and the virtual platforms have enabled some of those students to have their voices heard. So for me as an educator, I think about what are things we could do in the classroom that would create that same scaffold for those students, so that when we are back in person, their voice doesn't disappear, right? It stays at the forefront. I think the same in terms of students' health and safety. You know, in some ways, especially when you have the primarily residential campus, though we do also have some day students, this becomes the home that can sometimes take the, I don't want to say take the place of, but can compensate for some challenges they may have in their home away from campus. This has made us even more acutely aware of which students don't actually have a really safe or comfortable home to go to if they're not on campus. When they are on campus, the fact that that's the case is still going to weigh on their minds. And while we think we've been seeing that, there are still probably ways in which we've overlooked things that this makes us more aware of. So while I think right now we're, of course, deeply focused on the safety of our students as a primary element, that's always a primary element, and this will help us look at that from different perspectives.
I think what everyone said was spot on, and I want to build a little bit on what John just said about what I would call introverts in education, and how the online platform does provide, and I've discussed this and shared this with our faculty and with others, it amplifies the introvert. It gives the introvert an opportunity to capture their thoughts and deliver them in a cogent way, which is really hard when you're sitting in the classroom being expected to respond immediately as things are evolving. So it is a platform that is very supportive of potentially individuals who are introverts. The one other piece I would say, and I share this in our town hall with our students, we had weekly town halls with our students, a small group of students who participated, but especially at the beginning as they were trying to navigate this, and this was kind of a fearful moment for them, and they've been doing well, and now suddenly they're in this completely new environment and trying to learn a new way of doing things. And I said to them, you know, our faculty are in exactly the same place you are right now, many of them. They've never done this before, and suddenly they're the student, and they're figuring out how to navigate new technology and a new way to think about delivering what they want to share with you, their knowledge, and the ways that the education is being built, and having to do that on the fly, and having to spend an awful lot of time outside of the time that you're seeing, or either directly interacting or looking at voice threads or looking at materials that are prepared. So much is going on behind them. So they're in a very similar place to you in this moment. And it may have a profound effect on faculty to have this experience, to be a nascent learner. In some cases, some of them were already very comfortable in this area. But for others, this was brand new and figuring out how to be it. And so they were, in fact, students. So I think that was one of the learnings that will come out of this.
So I think it's a good moment we'll switch topics again. And this one, I think, will probably resonate with a lot of our listeners in that it's affecting all of us directly or indirectly, in our workplaces and with transitions that have happened. But, maybe we could hear first from Dr. Kennedy and Dr. Birge as our public institutions, but I'd like to hear from all of you as well. This idea of workforce. So as of last week, the Berkshires is approaching 30% unemployment as a result of, what's happened the last couple of months. And that's a staggering number. Dr. Birge, Dr. Kennedy, we've been in dozens and dozens of meetings about our workforce pipeline and strengthening it. And so much work has been done over the last decade to, nip away at those edges and get those numbers smaller for unemployment and get more people trained and retrained. But now it's like that whole formula gets completely thrown up in the air. And I wonder what your thoughts are on the role of your institutions as the Berkshires tries to navigate its way out of this.
So about a year and a half ago, when the governor's skills cabinet Berkshire blueprint was being developed, and many of us were part of that plan, we took a step back and looked at how we were providing workforce programming to the community. And we made the decision to realign our whole workforce approach to the Berkshire, the skills cabinet blueprint, which happened to also align with the 1Berkshire Blueprint 2.0. So we now have directors of allied health, a director of advanced manufacturing, a workforce director of allied health, a workforce director of advanced manufacturing, and a workforce director of hospitality. And we're totally focused on working with those different business sectors and how do we develop curriculum? What are the skill sets you need? What is the focus of developing non-credit and for-credit and certificate-based programs that will meet the needs that have been identified? Now, I know this is changing. This is a moving target. We have a train grant, a state grant that was supposed to be face-to-face. It was in the fast-track hospitality area, and it worked with, we built the curriculum. Your own Christine Hoyt was part of the inaugural group that launched that and developed a fabulous curriculum, and it was in place and with a lot of our business partners in the hospitality and tourism industry. We're able now, we've just been given permission to pivot that to be an online program. There'll be funds to provide for the tuition and fees for the individuals who want to participate in that. We'll be coming out with that in the coming days that will help people move into that field. So we're doing things virtually. We're doing things that are at no cost. We're applying for many grants to provide funding to cover the costs of individuals or whole industry sectors to participate in ways to upskill themselves. A lot of the curriculum we put in play this summer was devoted to upskilling, was providing people, you might have a little bit of time right now, and it might be an opportunity to get a certificate to pursue some classes that would make you more marketable as you think about what your next steps are. So the other things I would mention is we are about to launch a January cohort for our ADN program. We'll be piloting that with about 25 students. So we'll be taking in a full class this fall in our nursing program, our registered nursing program, and then launching a second cohort in January. We're relaunching our respiratory therapy program, which is something that people in our community might be interested in pursuing. There's been so much attention on the respiratory therapy assistant and what the role of respiratory therapy in addressing the pandemic. So we know that there are people who may have some new interests, who may be in a different position than they were in just a few months ago, and maybe thinking about what the future holds for them and what exploration, career exploration, educational exploration, what they want to pursue. And we want to be their partner as they think about what next steps might be.
I think Berkshire Community College is it's the nature of community colleges that I mentioned before. They kind of exist with one foot raised. They're prepared to make changes swiftly, more swiftly than four-year residential institutions can make. And so BCC is a tremendous asset for Berkshire County, particularly at this moment, always in general, but particularly at this moment when we think about the programs that Ellen was just talking about. I think programs are really important to the recovery for Berkshire County. We have a number of health suite programs, health sciences, community health education. We're looking at developing others that we think are going to be in demand, certainly in the Berkshires. I think it's also the case that we have to think about, we're all large employers in Berkshire County. And, this virus is really, I think lots of other organizations, particularly cultural organizations, have taken the hit on the chin, or more accurately on their balance sheets. And so I know that weighs on me really heavily to think about what is it that we're doing not to add to the pressures on the Berkshire economy. And so we're trying to make decisions so that we don't inadvertently become a burden for Berkshire County as well. And primarily that's in trying to preserve currently filled full-time jobs. We have had to make some decisions about reducing the adjunct faculty line by about 30%, but full-time positions are still on the books, and they will be on the books. So we think about that as an economic driver, particularly in Northern Berkshire County, because we think that's an important role we have. It's part of our mission as a public institution. And then the last thing I'll say about the economy, when you look back at the 2009 recession and you look at unemployment levels, at the height of that recession, the unemployment level was at 15%. People with a bachelor's degree, the height of their unemployment was 5%. And so people who have a college degree are much more agile in a changing labor force where they can find the work that they need. They have a broad set of skills that they can change kind of the focus and the focus of their career path more easily. And so I think that's one of the important things that all of us offer is degrees and credentials that create a skill set for our students and graduates that allow them to be more agile in that changing environment.
Anything you want to add, Dr. Weinstein or President Mandel?
Just to kind of echo what Jamie said, as in terms of being an employer and a driver of the economy, we're tucked away on a hill in Great Barrington, but we are one of the top 3 employers in Great Barrington, and so that's something that's key, and we're really mindful of that. One thing that has had to reduce when the campus was closed was some of our part-time employees, particularly at our Kilpatrick Athletic Center, which is the place in which many in the community use our campus. Some things we've had to reduce, and we're really, eager to welcome back many of those employees when possible and according to the state guidelines. So we're certainly mindful of that role we play in driving the economy of our local region in terms of people's employment.
And I would simply echo the same for Williams. We've been working very hard with around the concomitant financial struggles that have followed everything else to do careful financial planning with the hope and goal of keeping our workforce employed, which is both an effort to maintain our relationships and commitments to the people who work for the institution, and of course an awareness of the impact in the region that Williams has. And so that's remained a constant throughout this, and we're fortunate to be able to do that thus far. Our graduates tend to leave Berkshire County for the most part. They don't mostly come from here, but there are those that stay for periods of time, some long-term, some come back for long stretches later in life and contribute in other ways. But I just simply really want to echo something that President Birge said about specifically the significance of the education these students are getting. And I saw in some of the Q&As that came in, and I believe we may be heading to a question about sort of impact on students of all this and their futures. But the kinds of educations we all provide, and we provide very different kinds of educations, different ways in which we prepare students for the life that comes after. But it is so important, particularly now, as we try to create problem solvers and thought leaders and people who are going to move society forward, that we continue this work. And this, I would say, going back to something you asked in the last question about what the impact of all this on the future is, I think of those of us in higher education as stewarding the future. We are preparing the next generation of community engaged participants and leaders, broadly defined. And so whatever lessons we take out of this, I think we actually have to double down on our core mission and do whatever we can to protect our institutions so that we can prepare these students to go out and solve some of the problems that are emerging, and to take the lead on the research and the institutional efforts that are going to have to happen in the years to come.
Thank you all for that. I do want to jump into that last topic of focusing a little bit on the students. So, each of you are accomplished lifelong learners, deeply successful leaders, and I'm sure you've been through a lot of challenges in your careers. All of us that kind of move along in our careers face some difficult moments. The moment being faced right now by students, I think of the high school age students, the college age students, is really unlike anything we've seen in generations. And I think we all have such heavy hearts for those seniors that lost the second half of their graduating year, whether that was in a high school or on a college campus. We also think of those that are coming in their incoming freshman year. But really all the students who have had this experience that's so critical in their life and their maturation disrupted. So what would each of you have to, what guidance do you have to offer to those students right now that are really feeling like the plan they had laid out for them has been kind of turned upside down?
I'm just going to jump in here first, and I should note that I have a sophomore in high school just completing her sophomore year, and I have a sophomore in college completing his sophomore year. So I'm watching real time the impact of this in my household as well as out in my campus. So the first thing I want to say is that this crisis has definitely hit people in inequitable ways. And we know that. We've seen it on our campuses. It's very painful to watch that. And I know that not everybody has the same kinds of opportunities to use the language I used before, double down on their education at this moment. But one piece of advice I would have is that we try to nurture lifelong learners at Williams. And lifelong learning is often done betwixt and between other things we have to do, even when there are tremendous obligations. And I would say that I would just very much hope for the students, wherever they are in whatever capacity they have, to take advantage of opportunities to continue to expand their minds, whether it's through formal classes, online classes, but also one doesn't have to do this in the classroom, of course, because we are going to recover from this in some way, shape, or form, and the recovery itself is going to provide opportunities for them, but also new challenges. And so to the extent to which I think it's very hard and one of the things we saw in the feedback on remote learning that we got is that many students said that they felt less motivated working in new contexts, sometimes because they were really struggling with hardship, sometimes just because they were out of that residential learning experience. And I in no way mean to undermine how difficult this has been for everybody. Even so, I would say that taking advantage of opportunities that become available in this period to learn is one of the very best things that students can do to continue to expand their competencies, to be ready for the opportunities and challenges that are ahead.
I would also mention, I think, President Mandel, that the 50-year anniversary class at Williams did not have a commencement, and nor are they having what they would have expected for their 50th anniversary of celebrating their 50th. And I think that's amazing that it would be that particular year and in this moment. So this is not unprecedented that something like this could happen, and it probably in many ways shaped that class and how they see themselves, and it was with them through their whole careers and their whole way of living and how they look at life. So we know that people will probably be very impacted by this moment, and having lived through it, we've been trying to play up the fact that they are the class that will have this unique experience that it will never be forgotten, and it will be part of how they go forward in the world. I think the other thing that I would mention is to everybody who's participating today and all of your extended family and friends, no matter what you're doing right now and what you're thinking about what next steps might be, fill out a FAFSA. It's universal. It works at every school, whatever you decide to do, and there's no cost to doing that and preparing yourself for an opportunity that may be coming. So high school students who are sitting here, I'm not sure where this is all going and what I'm gonna do, fill out a FAFSA. Like, everyone out there should have a FAFSA. At Berkshire Community College, our students are 16-year-old homeschoolers who are doing dual enrollment. It's high school and college credit. And they go all the way up to recent high school graduates, to people in career transitions, to people who never thought college was an opportunity or an experience they would ever have. They're in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s. We've had people go through our nursing program in their late 60s because this was their lifelong dream, was to be a nurse. So I would say, whoever you are and whatever place you are in your life, this is a moment to say, double down. I'm going to double down and look at options that I may not have looked at had this not happened. This is the moment that will push me into a different place and a different way of thinking about what my future holds.
You know, I want to build off something that President Mandel had said about how inequitable this virus has been in our society. I think that we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat, right? I mean, everybody has different levels of access to resources and capacity to manage and cope with this. And some people don't have access to those resources. And so it's been really hard. I mean, I've heard these incredible stories from students about the experiences that they've had and their families have had, frankly. And I guess one of the things that I would encourage students to recognize and anyone to recognize is that it's an extraordinary period of time. It's hard to manage. It's hard to cope, and seeking out some help to find ways, strategies for coping with this is really important. You know, if it's a matter of reaching out to a clergy member or a psychologist or psychiatrist or somebody in the mental health field, that's a sign of strength. That's not a sign of weakness by any means. If you need some help coping with all of this, you need to ask for help, because it's really hard to manage all these things that are going on, and not to know what's on the horizon is especially difficult. So I think that as we think about how people respond to this particular era that we're in, and advice to students, but to anyone in particular, if you're having a hard time coping with this, find some help. And there are ways to get help. In fact, for many of our students, I suspect this is the case, that on our websites, we have links to getting support through telecounseling. But anyone can find an opportunity, or I hope they can find an opportunity, and they'll recognize that it's important to seek out help, to try and build those coping strategies for dealing with this particular era that we're in.
For me, this question about high school students is particularly dear to my heart, not just for our younger students that we have here at Simon's Rock, but in the job I'm transitioning out of, which is leading Bard College's public early college programs, where we have nearly 3,000 high school age students, around the country engaged in those. For me, because Simon's Rock was created, because there were students who wanted a different path and to not follow traditional pathways, I'm trying to remind our students this is a moment where an alternative pathway, perhaps for a period of time, becomes a norm or something everyone has to confront. They had chosen to confront that even when they didn't have to, right? So there was something that made them want to do something in a different way, right? They had decided early on to forego their traditional high school graduation to go right on to college a year or two early. As innovative thinkers at a place that was started to be about innovation, how can they harness this moment to not think about what hasn't been, but what can now be in the future, and to really spur that thinking that had driven them to come to Simon's Rock in the first place? I do understand that message can fall hard when you were deeply looking forward to that college graduation. And again, we certainly want to make that happen later, but to really think about what are the things that they can take from this, from living in this moment in history, and really spur on innovative thinking. And for them to help Simon's Rock and the world of education create the new innovations that we'll be looking back on 50 years from now as something that came out of this moment that they were a part of creating. And I think our students are totally able and capable of doing that. And part of the opportunity here is to really spur on, those innovative juices and to really bring this forward so that we can have some new pathways that come out, and that there are some ways in which the new normal has improved upon the normal that we were in, that we thought was perhaps perfect, but we've been, or perhaps not, but we're able to really improve on that and to be continuing to grow.
So thank you all for that. And I think that's important for students and parents to hear. We are getting sensitive on time. I know that President Mandel and Dr. Weinstein both have to get off in a couple of minutes. True to form, as educators, you all have done a good job of speaking to the spirit of most of the questions that have been submitted already. So I feel like we've addressed most of them. I want to throw out a real quick one and save us enough time for Dr. Mandel and Dr. Weinstein to just share some quick closing thoughts. But any insight into this notion of a gap year? It is something that's been discussed, obviously, much more broadly in recent weeks and months. And I know both parents and students have brought that question forward. What are some of your reactions to that?
I can just say quickly that actually, as an educator, I've always been a fan of the gap year, and I wished more students would take it. I'm not sure I wish as many would take it as are going to take it in the coming year, because it will have an institutional impact. And obviously, and I know many of my colleagues across higher education are worried about this, but just the gap year as a gap year in ordinary times can be an extraordinary experience. In this time, it is a little it's a hard question to navigate from the perspective of Williams specifically. If students decide that they want to either take a gap year, which would be incoming students, or take a leave of absence, which is our students who are already on campus for a semester or a year, we will certainly allow them to do that if they want to do it, and we will have a deadline after we determine what we're doing next year, so folks can assess their own choices in light of whatever decision we make. But I think one of the things that is, right now when you survey students, lots of students say when institutions like Williams go, if they go remote, that a lot of students are saying that they will take a leave of absence. And I think that the question will quickly arise, to do what? And I think that's, if the answer to that is an enriching one and there are great things to be done, then students should do it. If not, remote learning may in fact prove to be a better option for many students. And so I think that's just something each family and individual is going to have to sort through, given the realities that emerge. But we certainly anticipate that if we go remote, there will be large numbers that choose not to enroll that semester.
And I think for us, given our structure and timeline, gap year kind of means something different. Right? If a student decides not to leave high school early and come to Simon's Rock, that decision is to stay at their high school where they were. It's been kind of very inspiring to talk to prospective students and families. I've been doing a lot of Zoom calls with students who are interested and their families, and they remain deeply committed to wanting to come. They've made the decision that this is what they want. They decided to come because they didn't want to just stay in high school as they had been. So that motivation has still been really strong. Of course, some people will make different decisions. That to some degree is always the case with Simon's Rock. Some students apply and come the year after they initially started looking. So we'll have to see how, this situation affects our already somewhat unusual admissions pipelines. But, when I talk to a student and a family across the country in California determined to work with me to figure out how to make this a safe and viable option for their child that we can all feel is appropriate, they really want that to be possible. And so it's been really further inspiring me to think through all of those issues. We have to do it for these young people who want to be here. And that's where a lot of the thinking has been.
So before President Birge or President Kennedy speak to that, can I actually just, if President Mandel and Dr. Weinstein just want to share a closing thought, because then we have to jump off the call, and then I'll go back to Dr. Birge and Dr. Kennedy.
Yeah, first I just want to apologize. I have an 11 o'clock meeting a Zoom meeting in my next Zoom window. So I'm going to be walking four half inches to the right to join into that meeting. But thank you just very much for including me in the conversation. I really enjoyed the conversation. I really, in particular, like hearing what all my colleagues have to say in answer to the questions, and to learn from you as well across the higher ed landscape here. So I look forward to future opportunities to do that again. Thanks.
Thanks so much, President Mandel.
Thanks. I apologize for having to leave early. I'm actually leaving to go to another President's Zoom, which is the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities in Massachusetts does its President Zoom at 11 o'clock on Fridays. So that's our opportunity to interact across the whole state. But I'm just really thankful for this opportunity to get to be with my esteemed colleagues here in the Berkshires. As Jonathan said, I'm the incoming provost, so I actually start July 1st. So this is really helpful to make these connections and to get to talk about these issues here in our community. Really appreciate the collaborations in the Berkshires, because we are quite different than the eastern part of the state, and it's really important for us to come up with the right guidance and approaches that really serves us here in Berkshire County. So I'm just grateful to be a part of this community and really appreciate this opportunity to be with all of you today.
Dr. Weinstein, thank you very much for joining us. Congratulations on the new post, and for joining us before you're even formally starting in that position. And I think we all look forward to working with you.
Great, thank you.
So we have a few minutes if Dr. Birge or Dr. Kennedy, you wanted to speak a little bit to that gap year question, or we can just jump to some closing thoughts too.
I think that both John and Maud have done a nice job of responding to that. We don't have a lot of students that take gap years typically. I think they're very healthy. I took time away from college as an undergrad, and it was helpful for me. But we don't have a lot of those students. This year, we will probably see much more. We've seen softness in the market. We know that for first-time, full-time students, that they're thinking what their plans will be, or their families are thinking about it. So it's a little softer than it has been in other years. Interestingly enough, our retention rate is among the highest that we've seen in the last 5 years of those students who are here now who are planning to return in the fall. That's been a very high rate, and we're quite pleased about that. But we are seeing there's some softness in the market for the new students. And we think that's probably because there is this desire to take a gap year just to see what the path of the virus will be before they decide to enroll in college.
I would say a gap year means something very, very different at a community college. And we actually, for students who may not be thinking necessarily of taking a gap year, but maybe taking a step back about what they're going to do in the fall, it may be that a community college is the recipient of that student's decision to continue their education in a different way. And the community colleges are set up as the reason for the community colleges was to provide initially those first 2 years of a 4-year degree from way back and Berkshire Community College is the first community college in Massachusetts. But its whole curriculum was designed by a graduate of Dartmouth who established a very firm foundation in the liberal arts. So one of the things we didn't get to talk about, but all 4 of our institutions are grounded in the liberal arts. And right now everyone's very focused on career, but without those liberal arts, without those key pieces of knowledge and the skills and what you learn from a liberal arts education that helps you do critical thinking and communicate and work in teams, you're not actually terribly great in the workforce oftentimes. So we know the importance of that, and all 4 of us share a passion and a focus on that. So I think gap year for us means students who will be stepping in who may have not looked at us as a place to begin or continue their education. And obviously then the pressure is on us to show them why that was a good and wise move, and how well prepared they'll be when they make the transition to or back to the 4-year institution, not at the expense of our good friends at MCLA. So I've been really careful about how we've talked about that, but I have heard anecdotally from families who are doing that kind of decision making right now and thinking about, is the community college a good place? You're closer to home. You know, we have a little bit more control over everything, and what's this experience going to be like? And the nice thing about community colleges, particularly small ones like ours, is our classes are really small. So you'll never see perhaps more than 30, and you'll probably see more like 15 students in your class, and a lot of attention and I want to say devotion, but our faculty really know our students and interact with them constantly through the process of the course of the semester and beyond. So that's how I think.
I'll add that I think that, to Ellen's point, that the quality of education that students get at BCC is really good. BCC is our largest importer or exporter of transfer students at MCLA, and those students come here ready to learn. They hit the ground running, and so that foundation of the liberal arts at the community college level presents a really great opportunity for students to start their 4-year degree work right at the very beginning. Ellen, I think you said that so well. You must have had a very strong undergraduate education.
Absolutely, I did, and I'm very proud of. I'm going to celebrate 41 years in the Berkshires this year, and at my initial foray was to move into Berkshire Towers at North Adams State College on September 1st, 1979, and I will never forget that day, and I will never forget the impact it's had on my life, and my good fortune to be spending so much of my adult life, all of my adult life here in Berkshire County, and I treasure my time. I was exchanging an email with a faculty member, Dick Yanow, who is on the verge of retiring. I hope it's okay to share that. And we were exchanging emails last night talking about those early days and the things that went on, and how proud I am to this day to be a graduate of then North Adams State College, and now it's listed as Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts on all my materials. So very proud of that.
Well, we're proud to claim you as an alum, Ellen, for sure.
Thank you, Jamie.
A closing thought from either of you?
I would just say, obviously, thrilled to have been involved today, and thrilled that so many people have hung in there with us. You're dropping though, we can see that. I would say that the one thing that I didn't get a chance, 2 things I didn't get a chance to talk to, and Megan Wilden put it in the chat. I meant when I talked about the breadth of our students, to talk about our OLLI program and how important that is, and how important that has been as a lifeline to individuals, so many of whom may be the only person in their household right now, or 2 people. And although we're using online, that's not our permanent place, but we're probably learning that there are people who would appreciate more online offerings in OLLI as we go forward. And that's a volunteer group of people, a volunteer group of individuals who are senior learners, and they're so inquisitive and so curious. So I want to give a shout out to all the good work happening by Megan Wilden and Andy and Barbara Lane, the chair of that board, and that whole board and the curriculum committees that put all of this together. The other thing I would say is, and more at the macro level of community colleges, I think people are finally focusing on the role that community colleges play in their communities. And when you think about your first responders, you think about your police departments and your fire departments, you think about your EMTs, you think about the people who greet you, who are first to triage you at a hospital, the nurses, the physical therapists, the respiratory therapy assistants, the people who take care of your children in early education settings. Most of those people got their start, or got their certification, or started their education at a community college across this country. And it's those individuals who are right there on the spot doing what they can to support you, sometimes in moments of great need, where you can really step back and appreciate how important community colleges are to our country. The United States created the community college model, and it was after World War II when they recognized there would be so many people who would need an education, and they didn't have enough capacity in the four-year institution. So back then it was, North Adams was a teacher's school, and that's what, and it became a comprehensive institution, probably to respond to some of the very same issues. So community colleges play this critical role, and I think in some ways we could be having a moment where people step back and look and say, wow, they're across, and every community is served by a community college in the entire country. And they're, as Jamie, thank you so much for the kind words, nimble, responsive, can quickly develop programs, can quickly respond, can bring resources to bear, can write grants to get funds into a community. Huge partners with 1Berkshire, with Mass Hires, Heather Bolger, Melanie, the whole crew. We're right there wanting to work. We work so closely with the BIC. So we're just trying to be where we need to be supportive of this community. And obviously, having Berkshire in our name is such a gift, but we recognize how what we do matters to families across our community, and we want to be there to be supportive. So thank you again for the opportunity. Delighted to be partnered with Jamie at the end here as we come in, and Jonathan, fabulous emceeing of this whole thing. And we thank Ben Lamb for his man behind the curtain aspect of this whole thing, and all the wonderful people who posted questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them more carefully, but thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'll add my thanks to you and also to Ben. I might add also an alum of this fine institution. But thanks for pulling this together, not just this conversation, but the series of conversations that you've had. I think it's really important. I think BCC and MCLA are two of the most important assets for Berkshire County, and certainly our friends at Williams and Bard, Simon's Rock. These are institutions that are important to our community, not just as economic drivers, but when you look at the history of advancement in American society, literally going back to 1636 at the founding of Harvard, at every turn of advancement, every place, whether it was medicine or whether it was politics or sociology, every advancement of society at that turn, you find a role that higher education played. And I think that's going to happen now as we turn our next, take our next step and turn away from COVID. You're going to find that higher education is playing a role in that. It will be about preserving jobs. It will be about providing opportunities for people to be educated to change career paths. It will be a responsive way to help American society advance, as we've been doing for more than 375 years. So I'm just so grateful, Jonathan, for you and Ben and all the other folks at 1Berkshire for the good things that you've done to bring us all together, to have these conversations, and to promote the Berkshires.
Well, all that work that we do, it's a pleasure for us to do, especially when we get to work with such great partners. And wonderful job today, both of you. I do want to just, as we wrap up here, I want to thank all of our listeners, especially the 96 that hung in right till 11:08, the tried and true. I'd like to thank just my team at 1Berkshire for putting this all together. A lot goes into these productions, and Ben Lamb for being the man behind the curtain. And I'd like to thank the panelists, Dr. Mandel, who had to step off, and Dr. Weinstein. It was just a pleasure to have them both on here, and great to have them engage with us about their institutions and the critical work they're doing. And Dr. Kennedy and Dr. Birge, just thank you so much. It's a pleasure for us to work with you, and I have a feeling that in the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to be doing a lot of work together as we address what comes after this pandemic. So please check out more info, all of you, at 1berkshire.com. This virtual town hall should be available later in the day. Feel free to share it on your social media pages. Please try to join us next week. Next week, we're going to talk about the reopening of the visitor economy and how it certainly will look different, but we have some very good things that are still going to be happening. We have our VP of Tourism and Marketing, Lindsay Schmidt, is going to be joined by Lori Norton Moffett from the Norman Rockwell Museum. Sorry, lot my brain this morning. Brian Cruey from the Trustees of Reservations, and Mindy Morin from Canyon Ranch. And Ben Lamb will be coming out from behind the curtain next week to be the moderator. So with that, I just want to thank everybody again, and wish you all a happy Memorial Day weekend. It looks like the weather's going to be great. Please be smart and be safe, but also get outside and enjoy the Berkshires. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.